Good morning.
Hey, good morning, Melissa. It's Sebastian.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How you doing?
Oh, I'm hanging in there. My kids gave me their wonderful, summer cold.
Okay.
They won't share their donuts or cookies, but they'll share their germs. How are you guys holding up with the weather over that way?
Pretty good. We've had some crazy type storm, tornado type things up our way recently, but
Yeah.
the weather's been nice. How about you?
We are flat about underwater, but it just keeps raining. But I'd heard about all the tornadoes up your way, so I was thinking about you guys yesterday.
Yeah, definitely out of the ordinary, but we're making it through.
Good deal. Well, I hear it's supposed to let up in the next couple days or so, hopefully.
All right, I guess it's about 11. Let's wait a couple more minutes, I guess, and then you can go ahead and get started. I'm not
Perfect.
sure exactly how many we're expecting on the call, but we'll give them a few extra minutes to hop on here and then go from there.
Okay, sounds good.
Morning, Sebastian.
Hey, Max, how you doing?
Oh, how did you know it was me?
Oh, I talk to you frequently enough.
You are.
Yeah.
Just checking in and saying hi.
How you doing?
Oh, doing great. I just heard your conversation with Melissa. You all should come to Texas.
Well, what's the
Max,
temperature
don't
there?
tempt me. If there's any type of heat or sunshine down there, I may be there. So.
Oh, well, we got heat. It's right 80 degrees. It'll be about afternoon.
Oh.
And the sun is finally shining. I mean, they tell us here, I'm going to knock on wood, they tell us we live in the tornadoes in Pennsylvania and New York.
Gosh. We go from one day will be about 80 and the next day will be about 40.
Oh, my gosh.
Schizophrenic over here, so.
Yeah. I guess we have a few weeks of that in like February, but that's about it.
Yeah. I'm sure they will.
Hey, Melissa,
Yes.
we're just waiting on Bob to call in. Robin just came back to ask me for the call-in details, so once he's on, we'll go ahead and get started.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks.
Copy of the bill that you paid? Or your check back?
Okay, Melissa, I think he's on the call now, so if you want to get started, go right ahead.
Okay, great. Well, as I mentioned, if some of you guys were listening, I'm going to apologize up front. I have these kids who just love to share everything they get from school, including their germs. So I didn't want to back out on you at the last minute, but if there is some coughing and sniffling, I apologize up front. There's actually been a lot of interesting activity in the regulatory realm, even just the last couple of weeks. So more so than anything, I wanted to just bring you guys in on some of the things that we're seeing, some of the conversations that we have had with regulators, and just some of the recent sanctions we've seen come out. I do know that Tracy had asked me a question about cybersecurity, and I love the fact that you guys are all very interested in that and want to know how to help protect yourselves. What I want to let you know is in the next special report that's coming out the first part of June, they are doing a full article in there about things that they've seen in the industry when it comes to cybersecurity, specifically to our financial professionals. They're going to have a best practices guide in there on things that you guys can do with your own systems, both internally and externally. So we have some really great people working on those materials, everybody from Nick, our Chief Technology Officer, to many of you guys know Gary Gagnon, Josh Gowdy, all of our own internal subject matter experts regarding the cybersecurity. So I'm actually going to leave that pretty much to them. I just wanted to let you know that that's going to be coming out, like I said, in that special report. I think it's the first or second week of June. I know we're actually in the midst of writing it all right now. And that'll be a nice piece anyway, because it'll be something tangible you guys can have in front of you. You can reference back to it. There will be subject matter experts specifically listed in there that you can call out for additional information. So to those individuals that are very tech savvy, I would say and urge you guys to pay attention to it. It is a topic that continues to be top of mind, even when I go to the regulatory forums in Chicago, in Washington, D.C. It's one of the biggest discussion points that we have, just because I think with most of us, we're not subject matter experts when it comes to the technology side of things. So unlike security risks in the meaning of assets or asset management or financial planning or arbitration or litigation or regulatory risk, which we are all kind of involved in and knowledgeable about, the technology side is something that's up and coming. I will tell you that continues to be top of mind. And even in those industries, a lot of discussions about cryptocurrency and Bitcoin. So watch for more of that to come. One of the things that I wanted to share with you guys today is an update for the trade allocations that we talked about on this call the last time. I know that Jim and Fran had specific questions about what they should be doing in using Wealthport. We went back and actually made an additional proposal and discussion point. So if you use NFS or Pershing, even including Wealthport Rat, those systems have automatic defaults built in so that you can't necessarily change the way that it's allocated. So if you guys use NFS or Pershing, it's just important for you to know if a regulator asks you or somebody asks you how you allocate trades, just tell them that it's done pro rata according to the system as the default. A financial professional can remove the default, but we haven't found any instances where they have. And if that's removed, it's done by a random analysis or a random algorithm that's determined by NFS and Pershing. So there's nothing additional for you guys to do. It's already set by the systems, and we'll pull that documentation on the back end. I just wanted all of you guys to be educated enough to know if somebody asks you to simply tell them that it's allocated according to the defaults of the clearing firm system. Outside custodians, we're still working on best practices for those, and it's going to be dependent upon which outside custodians you use. But I wanted to cover and answer the questions in regards to the NFS and Pershing because that's where we had the biggest questions. Do you guys have any additional questions regarding that? Okay. Hopefully that makes it a lot easier for you. One of the other things I wanted to talk about was, it's kind of twofold. I wanted to talk about trends and client complaints that are being seen both through the regulatory's audits and then our own audits internally. So as you guys all know, the OC, which is the exam portion of the SEC, it's the exam arm, comes out with a report every year, both at the beginning of the year or end of 2018, first of 2019 with the OC initiatives. And then much later in the year, they come back with what were common deficiencies that they've seen. So while they haven't come out with the common deficiency report yet, they did allude to this in their 2019 exam priorities. So there's a couple key things I wanted to discuss. One, because they have that in there as an exam priority, so they will be looking at it as they exam not only RIAs, but also as they exam individual financial professionals. But also because I'm hearing that people are actually doing this when I'm talking to people in the industry. So one of those items that comes up as a high item for them is how many of you guys give loans to your clients? Good answer. So we are finding in the industry, not so much here at Cambridge, although unfortunately we do run across it from time to time, but it amazes me in discussing with more individuals who have their own RIA, but again, with regulators, that there is a pattern of advisors giving their clients loans. So while there's no rule that says you technically can't do that, there's just a number of conflicts that it proposes that for us here, we just don't allow it because many of the conflicts cannot be overcome. I can tell you in talking to people, excuse me, I've talked to one firm that they provide loans to their clients who can't make their IRA contributions. So they give them the money to make their IRA contributions in hopes that during their tax refund process, then the client pays them their tax refunds. Can you guys think of any conflicts with that? Well, let me help you out. One of the conflicts is then enticing clients to continue to do business with you. Like basically at the end of the day, the regulators look at that as you're paying clients to do business with you. And they believe that that's an unfair and quasi-fraudulent activity. Another one is, you know, who is managing those loans and are they charging interest, and what happens if the client can't pay the loan back? Who's the collection agency? All these other just business risks that are entailed in that. The other one that we see is there's three of them. This one really kind of scares me, but they give them a loan until they can get a reverse mortgage. So they're loaning clients money until their reverse mortgage is processed, and then the clients are having that income. So I'm sure, as you guys can imagine, there's a number of risks associated with that as well, whether or not a reverse mortgage was right for the client. Do they believe that that is a recommendation on behalf of the advisor? Is the advisor a financial professional getting kickback from a reverse mortgage company? What happens if that client then still can't pay their bills even after they have the reverse mortgage processed? So there's just a number of inherent risks with that one. And then the other one is just loans in general. So not just giving them to clients, but also advisors who are getting loans from their clients is another area that we've seen popping up in the industry. So I want to make sure that everybody understands our policy that you can't take loans from clients as well, because we have seen that, again, not so much just here, but in the industry as a whole, where advisors or financial professionals are taking loans from their clients for either their business expenses or maybe a personal hardship. They have a good relationship with the client. It's still just not a good idea. Again, there's a number of risks there that are inherent that just can't be mitigated. And I'm, to be quite honest, not even sure how we would disclose them appropriately. Does that make sense? Does anybody have questions on that?
Lisa, are we differentiating between personal loans to clients and firm loans to clients?
So any loan to a client that comes from an advisor's business or personal assets is just not allowed at Cambridge. So that's what we're specifically talking about. Not, for example, if you were looking at a client for a non-purpose loan at NFS or Pershing. So those are more products to help a client, or in most cases for high net worth clients. So I'm talking more specifically about an advisor taking their personal or business assets, cash, to loan to clients. Did that clarify for you, Max?
Yes, sure does. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So the other one that we've seen quite a bit is the SEC is really concentrating and looking into how fees are being charged. More specifically on today's call, I want to talk about being charged in accordance with the advisory contract. So what I want to encourage all of you to do is to do a spot check of your clients' accounts periodically to ensure that they are actually being charged the way you intend for them to be and the way that you have laid out in the paperwork. So what I would say is we do random samplings, and we have risk mitigating procedures here on this back end as well, but that doesn't mean that we catch everything. And it's good for you to know as well what's, just to ensure that you are aware of what's going on with your client accounts. We have ran into some situations where some things were happening, accounts were being billed not the way they were intended to be. And so we do ask that the advisors, verify accounts are set up according to the way they intended them to be. Even putting in just a sampling method, looking at any new accounts that you have set up within maybe the past month or the past quarter, and just double checking to ensure that those are being charged the way that you intend for them to. That's going to help everybody in this process. One, if it's set up to where, we don't want you guys losing out on money. We don't want to overcharge clients and potentially have to pay them back money later. We just want to make sure everything is tight and fit. And you, as your own business people, should also be aware of what's being charged with your accounts and how they're being handled. That is, again, something that the SEC is really concentrating on. I think you can look any given day or given week at their their sanctions, and that is one of the highest sanctions right now that you see is they found that an RIA or a financial professional individual was not charging client accounts, or the client accounts were not being charged as described in the agreements and what was okayed and signed off on by the client. So I just encourage you guys to take a look at that on a periodic basis as well. Any questions there? Gosh, you guys are so quiet today. Okay, well, I want to take a minute then to just talk about probably the two. I know we talked about this on a call last year, but when we did a review, again, of our own internal audit and, again, a patterns review of complaints and arbitrations, two things. With the audits, it's pretty much the standard stuff. It's advertising. Somebody didn't send an advertising piece through, or they didn't catch and make the necessary changes to it, and correspondence. I think those are just two beasts that will probably always be on our top one with 3,200 advisors, or 3,500 advisors. It's always going to be on our top one. So I'm not sure that pattern will ever change. So what I like to concentrate on more is the things that are kind of the low-hanging fruit that we see. So I would make sure you guys are paying attention to your U4s, and that you have any liens updated. If you have any outside business activities, make sure you have those done. Those are really, again, low-hanging fruit. You don't want to forget about those. And trust me, absolutely know how easy that is. I forgot to submit one again for a finance committee that I'm a part of. So I, much like you guys would got the nasty gram. You need to make sure that you're disclosing these before you do the activity. So I just want to remind everyone of some of those little simple things. Excuse me. The other ones with arbitrations and complaints, the pattern still seems to be pretty consistent there. The biggest amount of complaints are either customer service to the client. I called my advisor, they never returned my phone call. I went to their office and can't find them. I feel like they are not ever giving me updates on what's happening with my money. And the other one is my account didn't perform against the benchmarks. This one to me is always an interesting one, and I always have to wonder if there's not a lawyer sitting in the back somewhere feeding information to them. And I think we've talked about this too on a lot of calls. Just, be careful when you're talking to your clients, and if you are comparing yourself to a benchmark, because if you are doing that, then the client is going to expect you to beat that benchmark. And we all know that that doesn't always happen. So be sure that you're clear and concise to your clients about how you manage their money and all of the different services you provide them and the things that you take into effect. Like, I know I have one advisor that says, I'm not managing your money towards any benchmarks. I am managing your money according to the goals that we have discussed, and you set the financial goals you want to meet. So in some years, I'm going to be right there with the benchmark, and in some years, I'm not going to be anywhere close, because we're not managing the benchmark, we're managing your assets according to the goals you want to hit. I think that's very important to put out there. And again, if you are managing to a benchmark, make sure that you're explaining to your clients when you may or may not be in line with the benchmark and what that means to them. So in both of those situations, whether it's the benchmark issue, the performance, or the customer service, that communication with your clients is so important. And if you have a client that's not returning your calls and you can't find them and you haven't talked to them, make sure you document the periods in time that you've reached out to them, you've tried to contact them. Make sure you're documenting any services you're doing. If you're continuing to review their allocations and their portfolio and do research on it. Again, whether you can find them or not, the SEC says you have to be providing them a service to charge a fee. So if you're charging them an asset management fee, even if you're not able to meet with them, you need to make sure you're providing some type of service. And then don't be afraid to get rid of a client. If you have one that is difficult or one that is just not responsive, do not be afraid to terminate them and get rid of a client. Just like any other relationship, you need to make sure that it fits for you, because it's not just you managing their money. This is your livelihood. And if you think about any other situation, anytime there's somebody who's largely difficult or non-responsive, it's usually not pretty in the end, and you never want to get to that particular end result. Any thoughts on any of that stuff?
Hey, Melissa, this is Tom Walsh. I'm just talking so that you don't feel lonely, I guess. So
thank you.
One of the problems with the benchmarking, I mean, kind of from a practical standpoint, is that, at least for me, is that no client actually probably is invested such that they should be looking at a single familiar benchmark. But the problem is that most of the software that's available to us doesn't allow us to customize benchmarks. You know,
Sure.
the idea of coming up. So I don't, you know, that's the other kind of problem. So people, they look at the news and they see the, you know, the S&P 500 or something like that, and they kind of forget that they're allocated 70-30, and that their 70 doesn't include exclusively S&P stuff. It might include, you know, sub breakouts and things like that.
Totally agree. And those are the conversations you just want to make sure you have and document with them. What I have found is that the customer service issue and the my account's not performing with the benchmark really go hand in hand. It's typically an issue where the advisor probably didn't explain like they should have to the client how their account was going to be allocated and how it was going to be managed.
Or they
and
forget.
then wasn't having, that's true, and another good reason to document, but that advisor wasn't having those continued conversations about, you know, when the client would come and say, hey, my account's not performing to the benchmark, having that continued conversation. Well, if you remember, you know, even if the benchmark is just a guide, it's not always going to be exact. So whatever that conversation you have to have with them, and document it, because I really do find that those are hand in hand. Usually what happens, we start looking into the benchmark and what they've told them, and we find that they haven't actually communicated with the client in maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And so it really comes from that lack of communication.
Right.
And I did forget. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
This is Jeff Tomasetti. I have a quick question about the communication aspect. If you don't hear from a client, I document phone calls, like I left a message at this particular time, date, and, you know, what time zone we're in. But I also send emails that never get answered. Is that also part of a communication attempt?
Yes. And something you might think about, just because we all know how email and technology is kind of iffy sometimes. If you're, you know, corresponding with a client who doesn't use email, you may think about sending them not handwritten, but sending them snail mail letter too. So you can say, look, I tried to call them, I tried to email them, and I tried to send them regular mail. Okay. And then you want to just make sure you're documenting whatever services you're doing on that account, especially if you're charging an asset management ongoing fee. So whether it was you allocated the account according to what you guys had previously discussed on file, or you did research about the allocations on the account and found nothing needed to be done at this point in time. So whatever you're still doing for the account, make sure you're documenting that. So it's not a situation later of, well, you can't charge a fee and not be doing anything regardless of whether or not you can get a hold of the client.
Melissa, this is Max again. I think this is a good segue to a question I have about texting. I'm in the process of setting up the hearsay relate texting for myself, but in the meantime, I have clients who just don't look at their email every day or every other day. So when I send them an email that requires an immediate answer and they don't answer within a day or so, I send them a regular text, I guess a non-compliant text, simply to say, check your email. Am I out of compliance doing that?
Yes.
Oh boy.
So I would make sure that those go through hearsay. Any texting with clients for securities related, even if it's check your email, what will happen is the regulators, well, then, okay, what's the email that you want them to check? And then so they go back and look at that, and it's securities related, so that's really a securities communication. So I would just make sure that you're putting that through hearsay.
Okay, thank you.
Excuse me. I did want to take a step back. I did forget one thing off my little notes here from our own audit results is we have a lot of advisors who use third-party money managers, and they're forgetting to make sure to give their advisors still the CIRA ADV2A and their own ADV2B. That is one of the things that we've seen come up, it seems, often lately in the audits. And so I just wanted to put that out there as a general disclosure to remind you that even if you're using a third-party money manager, you still need to give the client the CIRA ADV2A and your individual ADV2B in addition to the third-party money manager's ADV2A. So again, just some of those low-hanging fruit. If you use a third-party money manager, make sure you're giving them all 3 disclosures. Is there anything else that's on top of mind for you guys? Any questions, any articles you've seen out there? I'm not going to talk necessarily about best interest right now. I know there is a ton of activity on that. We're supposed to actually have another proposal out sometime this week or next week. It's interesting. There's very different opinions on when that's going to come out and what it's really going to entail in the industry. So I don't want to panic anybody any one way or the other, or even downplay something until we actually have more concrete information. I'm sure you guys will be completely overloaded once we have a chance to read all of it and analyze it. So I'm going to kind of hold off on that. But anything out there you guys have heard, have questions about, we're thinking?
Listen, this is Jeff Tomasetti again. I have something that keeps me up at night.
Okay.
It's 2 things, and I guess they could go hand in hand. One is these phishing emails. I'm always worried that I'm going to click on something that's going to break Cambridge and my home office. I read some nasty things about like fake lawsuits coming from lawyers' offices now and saying, you know, you must reply to this or this will happen. I mean, of course, I don't do that, but I don't know if anybody's ever experienced any of this. But the other thing that really keeps me up is clients asking for money via email. I know I have systems in place. I always try to get a verbal confirmation that they're requesting that they're requesting money. There's some best practices for, verifying for withdrawals out of accounts that you have, or maybe someone else has some ideas that what they do to kind of counteract any fraudulent activity.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so the phishing emails, that is a true thing, and I'm not going to touch on that much, only because I think it's going to be addressed in that cybersecurity. That's part of the cybersecurity, and they're going to talk about that. Basically, at the end of the day, what we say is if you do not know the person that is sending the email, don't click it open or answer it. And I think we all live in a day and age now that people are used to that. I know I'll get calls all the time from somebody that said, hey, we actually sent you this email. You may not know me, but this is a real email from this. Please call me back. Mm-hmm. And so I basically at home even or here, if I don't know the person and I don't know somebody is sending me something, I just don't even open it.
Delete it. Yep.
And like I said, that cybersecurity thing is going to address some of that. The clients asking for money through email, it seems to have quieted down a little bit, but I know it comes in ebbs and flows, and it is a true thing. But when clients' emails get hacked, and that can happen in a majority of ways, what I always tell people is just call the client. It's always better to call and check than to have an issue where we have to try to stop the transfer or stop the withdrawal. And, if not, then you've got to put E&O in play and all of these different things. And you could just be out the money if you can't reclaim it.
Okay. Yeah, I do that. I just was wondering if there was any other procedures that people may do that are a bit more efficient.
Hey, Melissa.
I'm happy to. Yep.
Oh, this is Bud Boom. I was getting like 20 or 30 odd emails a day. And of course, I clicked on some to unsubscribe. Do you recommend not doing that? Just continue to erase them or get rid of them?
I do. I suggest just deleting them and not clicking on anything in there. I think they'll talk about it again in the cybersecurity, because what happens sometimes is if you hit anything in the email, there's ways that gives them the access needed to get into your computer.
Okay. All right. Okay. Sounds
now that's
good.
different than sometimes you know if it's like Financial Planning Magazine, or because we get a lot of spam mail too. I'll
Right.
unsubscribe to those. But if it's really something I've never heard of, I don't know the person, I just delete it.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And I'm happy to open it up to the floor. Is there anybody out there that has a more efficient way or something that they wanted to share in regards to when the client is asking for money?
Of course, asking for money, this is Max again. The best way, or most of the time, when a client asks, like for a distribution from the IRA, there has to be paperwork passed on, back and forth. So a client asks me for a payment or a distribution out of the IRA. You send them by email, by the secure, of course, encrypted email, the distribution form, and then they return the signature page, and the signature. So that's kind of, and of course, the money would go into their bank account, which is on the system, if it's by, doing it by ACH or something like that. So these are built-in measures, I think, that are okay. But I think in addition to that, a call to the client is always a good idea.
Melissa, I have an example that I think would really bring to light some stuff. I have a client, and I do not have her New York Life annuity because it was sold by a New York Life agent, but I have some other money of hers. And somewhere along the line, she was in Heathrow Airport and accessed her iPhone. And an IRA distribution was processed by going to her emails, pulling off an old form, paste and copying her signature, and setting up a new Wells Fargo account. And it went to her agent at Wells Fargo. It was processed. And she caught it when she was looking at her account review the day before Thanksgiving and called me. And I said, you get on the phone right now and call your New York Life agent. And what I looked at in this was there were 3 opportunities for that to be caught. A, KYC. This was not a distribution that she normally made. It was more money than she ever takes out. 2, the agent never called her. And 3, there was a new bank account, and it was obvious that that signature on the form was pasted and copied.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It got processed.
And they're getting really tricky. It is true. Yeah. And that's why I think it's just always good to call them, because we have had similar instances, and it gets caught, and so we can reverse it in time. But you're right, if it goes for in a certain amount of time, there's just no way we can pull it back. And they have gotten, I think Bob actually even told me this story. I mean, they get tricky enough to where they actually called one of his advisors one time pretending to be the client, saying, I'm sending you paperwork to do a withdrawal, and I'm going to have a new bank account on it and all this stuff. But the advisor happened to know that that was not the client. And so they caught it and didn't process it. And that's why I also always suggest that you then call the client with your the contact information you have on file for that client. So I think that's a perfect example of how tricky they're getting, and it just, I'm not sure that there is another good way.
Yeah, I was just amazed, but a simple phone call would have stopped that.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that with us, because they are trickier every day.
Trying to stay a step ahead of the bad guys is getting job.
It is. Well, is there anything else you guys wanted to address today?
Hi. So this might be a can of worms, but I don't know, something that was I guess when we were discussing the loan stuff before, it just made me think. Do you have any comments? So over the course of time, without acknowledging anything in particular, it's like I'll do anything, to help my clients. It's maybe not anything, but I mean, but stuff that's kind of outside of the realm of what would normally be a scope. An example would be I had a special needs client, and they were trying to get financial aid for their a neurotypical daughter in college, and they were afraid that they were going to have too much money. And so it happened to be my alma mater. I called the college and found out that, while there were objective criteria for providing aid, subjectively, they also had some discretion. And, if the family has a story that would lead them to believe that kind of while they have income, it might be precarious at times, maybe they would provide them some aid. So I did that, and then I helped them. I literally helped them write a letter requesting aid for their daughter. And she was rewarded aid, which is a good answer. But anyway, so this is a kind of an example of things that are at the broadest scope of things that you might do. Thinking about it from a loan standpoint is that, you might, aside from providing them documents, you might really sort of help them, get refinanced, kind of hold their hands and things like that. Do you, from a compliance standpoint, have a concern about being too expansive as an advisor?
I think you do have to be careful that you don't step over any lines. So, for example, in your situation, I think it was fine. You were gathering information. You just knew who to call. You were helping them put that together. Where it might have crossed over a line is if you then were to, and I've seen advisors do this, help them figure out how to hide money so that they weren't having to report it all. I have a situation with an advisor that had a special needs child that was now an adult, still special needs. They were trying to get them into a special needs home. The advisor was helping them to hide certain assets and income so that they didn't have to pay as much. And I'll be quite honest with you, it was in Minnesota. The state of Minnesota came after both the advisor and the clients for that activity.
Right.
So I think you just need to be careful, and when you're doing some of these activities, say, am I, just be conscious of whether or not you're crossing any lines. Again, are you gathering information?
And of course, the more traditional stuff of, of always, because I'm a lawyer, but I very clearly don't try to give people legal advice, specific legal advice, and same thing for accounting, because there's I guess those are the most traditional lines. Well, what do you think? It's like, well, ask your accountant. I mean, I can tell you that, what the maximum amount is that you can put in there, but other than that, I'm not sure if that's the best thing for you to do from your individual tax situation.
But I think helping them facilitate the processes is fine. I've tried not to, I got to come up with a better term because apparently they started fining people for saying quarterbacking, but, helping your clients facilitate the process of, loan paperwork or a mortgage or financial aid.
Right. And this special needs stuff, I mean, because, at least for me, the reason I'm doing it, other than I'm, whatever, is that they're sometimes they're just kind of so overwhelmed with their daily lives. It's like, well, no, we haven't gotten to refinancing. It's like you got to refinance because we figured out that you've got all this unreimbursed medical expense. We got to get that number down. We got to make you as efficient as possible. So what do you mean you can't get to it? I'll help you. I'm going to help you get to it. By golly, we're getting to it.
I think just be conscious of, any time the words come up of reorganizing assets to have availability to something you didn't have before can be problematic. Anytime you're talking about hiding assets, that's always a red flag for me.
Right.
So, just be conscious.
Okay.
And if you ever have a question, feel free to reach out to any of us in compliance, and then we can talk it through.
Call compliance voluntarily?
Yes,
that's crazy.
Absolutely.
That's crazy.
It's better than having to work with them on the back end.
I'm just teasing.
So, but a lot of the times we can help you work through those guidelines and then potentially document anything that we think would be beneficial for you down the road in case it comes up as questionable. So, yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, and that's like a whole philosophical conversation which we can have when we're drinking. But I mean, so it's in the broadest sense, it's about, with so much of other part of this world becoming robotized or algorithmized or something like that, it's sort of the search for where you're providing your alpha in general.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that's a really good example of, when we reached out to a lot of our advisors to talk about robo-advisors and building this and that, when you got down to it, that's not really what they wanted, because they wanted to continue to have those personal relationships with their clients for these exact reasons. But they wanted to have more efficiency in their practice. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Well, before we end, are there any other questions, any other things that are keeping you guys up at night, anything we want to toss around on this call?
Just thinking of the other things that keep me up at night, but I don't think I'm going to mention them in the call.
Well, if you need me later, you can call me. Otherwise, I'll give you guys
crap going on with my son.
Well, anything to do with kids, I'm probably out on. Well, if you guys think of things in the meantime, just let me know. And I know Tracy and Sebastian will collect information again for our next call, because we want these to be as productive as possible for you guys. And like I said, if you think of things in the meantime, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll give you guys 15 minutes back.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. We'll talk to you later.
Thanks,
Bye.
Melissa.
Thank you.